Okay. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here on this cold Thursday afternoon. This is Stories from the Archives, sponsored by the UAMS Historical Research Center and the UAMS Library here in Little Rock. Glad to have you here. I'm Tim Nutt, Director of the Historical Research Center, and the Stories from the Archives series allows us to show artifacts that are in our collection, some artifacts that maybe you might not would have the opportunity to see. And so we take those artifacts and we talk about the people or organizations or events that are associated with that particular artifact. So today I'm pleased to have Suzanne Easley here. She is the Assistant Director of the UAMS Historical Research Center and also the archivist here at the center. Suzanne's been with the UAMS Library for a number of years. She's been full-time at the Historical Research Center since 2006. And before that, she was part-time. And then before that, she actually worked in the Technical Services Department here at the library. So she knows the ins and outs of the library. And we are pleased to have her working in the Historical Research Center. She is a great resource for us. Again, glad to have you all here. If you have any questions during this presentation, please use the chat feature in Zoom, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So I am going to turn it over to Suzanne, turn off my video and mute myself, and she's going to share her screen. And thank you again for all of you for being here. And Suzanne, take it away.
All right, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it, and thank all of y'all for attending the presentation today. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started here. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about Mamie O Hale, who developed and implemented an educational course for Black midwives in Arkansas during the 1940s. Most of the documents and the photos in this presentation are from the collections of the Historical Research Center. So Mamie Hale was born in Winona, West Virginia, and she attended secondary schools in her native state. In 1934, she graduated from the Freedmen's Hospital Training School for Nurses in Washington, D.C. as a registered nurse. In addition to her studies at nursing school, she served as president of the student organization, a member of the student council, and business manager for the students' newsletter. She also actively participated in the drama club and glee club, experiences that, as you will see later, came in handy in conducting the midwife classes. After graduation, she worked for a year as a public health nurse with the Works Progress Administration in Fayette County, West Virginia, and then at the Public Health Nursing Association in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 7 years. In the spring of 1942, she traveled to Little Rock to meet with Margaret Vaughn, who was supervisor of nursing at the State Board of Health, and Tom T. Ross, state health officer, and was hired to develop and implement an intensive course of training for midwives in the state. Before reporting for work in Arkansas, Mamie Hale attended the Tuskegee School of Nurse Midwifery in Alabama. Applicants had to be a graduate of an accredited nursing school and registered to practice nursing. The Tuskegee School was an 8-year joint project between the Alabama Department of Health, the U.S. Children's Bureau, and the Julius Rosenwald Fund. The Tuskegee Institute was only indirectly involved because the hospital where the nurse midwives trained and lived was on the campus of the Institute. So the term nurse midwife was used to distinguish nurses with training in midwifery from lay midwives who were taught by other midwives in their family or community. Hale graduated in January 1943 after 6 months of study, which included 550 hours of practice in the field and clinical service. The curriculum included obstetrics, nurse midwife techniques, participation in teaching mothers classes, and conducting midwife meetings, and lectures on specific topics such as syphilis, tuberculosis, and malnutrition. Following her study at the Tuskegee School, she worked in the Crittenden County Health Department in Marion, Arkansas as a nurse midwife for about 1.5 years, delivering babies, working with midwives, advising pregnant women on prenatal care and new mothers on child care. From September 1944 to June 1945, Hale attended Simmons College in Boston, graduating with a certificate in public health nursing. She attended under the Federal U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps program, a World War II program that subsidized nursing education for any woman aged 17 to 35 years and in good health. The program was groundbreaking for the time in that subsidies were provided to all students regardless of race and all nursing schools. Applicants had to agree to complete their studies in 30 months and pledge to serve in a military or essential civilian nursing capacity during the war. So after her return from her educational leave, Hale was appointed the nurse midwife consultant to the State Board of Health to begin expanding an extensive midwife training course to the other counties in the state. In 1945, approximately 1,400 midwives in Arkansas attended 7,600 births, 70% of which were for Black women. The majority of Arkansas women living in rural areas relied on midwives due to poverty and a lack of transportation or access to obstetrical care and medical facilities. This was especially true for Black women, as few hospitals provided beds for them, and Black physicians were not allowed to see patients in whites-only hospitals. If beds were available for Black patients at all in these hospitals, the care and facilities were often inadequate. Black physicians or organizations did operate a few hospitals in the state, mostly in urban areas, but not enough to meet demand. In 1945, only 10% of Black women in Arkansas gave birth in a hospital, whereas 60% of white women did. This 1947 map illustrates the number of midwife deliveries reported to the Board of Health for each county. The southeast area of the state, with the largest populations of Black residents, had the highest number of deliveries, with Crittenden, Phillips, and Jefferson County shown in gray, each having 700 or more for the year. The Board of Health had been trying to train and regulate midwives since the 1920s without much success due to a lack of personnel to adequately supervise them. There was no law that required midwives to have annual permits to practice. Midwives who attended monthly classes taught in counties with public health nurses and had 2 recommendations from a local physician could receive a permit. They also had to be in good health and be of, quote, good moral character and agree to abide by health board regulations. And this photo shows a midwife class in Forest City, Arkansas in 1929. I wasn't able to find very many pictures of the midwife groups in our History of Public Health collection. And this was the only one that I could find that was identified that was before 1945. So I'd like to find more of those. Initially, the Arkansas Medical Society opposed the granting of midwife permits and training classes or the use of nurse midwives. The society advocated that the practice of midwifery be outlawed altogether and created committees to study the so-called midwife problem and maternal and child health in the state. But by the 1940s, the committees had come to the same conclusion as the Board of Health. there were not enough trained midwives to replace lay midwives, few hospital facilities or specialists for obstetrical care, and few white general physicians willing or able to attend that many home births or even seek refresher courses in obstetrics. The Committee on Midwifery urged Arkansas physicians to support the Board of Health's midwife program by conducting prenatal exams for midwives patients and by accepting patients who were experiencing difficulties with pregnancy or birth. Public health officials in Arkansas believe that midwives could play an important role in the early detection and prevention of maternal and infant health problems in two ways. Excuse me. By notifying the local health department or physician of potential health problems in expectant mothers and newborns, and by sharing the health information learned in their classes with their patients and community. So along with the midwife training, the Board of Health used federal funding through the U.S. Children's Bureau to launch a program for premature infant care and prevention. Prematurity was the leading cause of death for infants, which was defined as being under 5.5 pounds. The plan included provision of incubators and kits of special feeding equipment and clothing to every county, educational conferences for healthcare workers, and scholarships for nurses to attend clinics on preemie care. Irene Johnson was hired as the health board's consultant on premature infant care. She is shown here with a carrier used to transport premature or sick infants, which I will talk more about later in the presentation. Maternal mortality rates were also a concern, with postpartum infections and hemorrhaging leading causes of death. In 1944, the rate for Black mothers was 3 times higher than for whites. Maternity clinics were organized through the local health units to make it easier for expectant mothers to get free prenatal exams and blood tests. And midwives would often accompany their patients to these visits. So who were the midwives that attended Hale's classes? The average age of lay midwives in Arkansas was 60 to 80 years old. Most were deeply religious, feeling that they had been called by God to serve their communities and had been taught by family members who were midwives. 3/4 of them could not read or write. They walked, rode a bus, or depended on family or a neighbor to drive them where they needed to go. Midwives were highly respected in their communities as leaders and advisors, especially in health matters. They spent more time with the mothers than the physicians, often providing household help before and after the birth, and charged $10 to $25 for their services. Benny Mama McGuire's experience was characteristic of Arkansas midwives of the time. She was 85 years old in 1971 when this article was written, and would practice as a midwife until she was 91. In 1945, when Hale's training program began, she would have been 59 years old. As a young girl, she had a dream about wearing a string of pearls that hung to the floor. Her grandmother, who was a midwife, interpreted that as a sign that she should start training Benny as a midwife. The first baby she delivered was her sister's child, and she gained additional experience by traveling with a country doctor in Tennessee before moving to Mark Tree, Arkansas. Initially, she charged $15, but by 1971, her fee was $20 and an extra $5 for twins. She once assisted a doctor with delivering a baby that the doctor felt was too weak to probably survive. So she said that she sat for 12 hours with holding this baby with warm blankets before it ever began to cry. And she said that it did live. So, and At 85, she felt she might be too old to be attending births at night and in all kinds of weather, but she'd sworn an oath as a midwife to help those who needed it. And so before we leave this image, I want you to take note of her suitcase of midwife supplies that are open on the chair, the glass bottle of soap on the table next to the lamp, and the enamel pan on the stove. And I will talk more about these items later. Much of what we know about the structure and content of Hale's midwife course comes from two articles she wrote and published in the U.S. Children's Bureau journal, The Child. The first one was in 1946, and it was called Arkansas Teaches Her Midwives. And the second was Arkansas Midwives Have All-Day Graduation Exercises in 1948. In the 1946 article, she noted that reliance on lay midwives would continue until adequate medical and hospital facilities are made available to all at a price that patients can afford to pay, and that critics should stand by the midwife and help her as much as possible, since she is still a much needed person in her community. Through the course, she hoped to encourage younger women to take up the practice of being, quote, a modern midwife in their communities. She also comments on the scarcity of trained Black nurse midwives in the rural South due to the hardships and difficulties involved. Low pay, irregular hours of teaching and attending births, constant travel, often in remote areas at night, and resistance from some older midwives towards instruction. She observed that, quote, the Black nurse midwife must be absolutely consecrated to her work, just as missionaries, clergymen, and some doctors and teachers are. And in that regard, she must have empathized greatly with the midwives that she taught. Hale's intensive training course was considered supplementary to the training, supervision, and monthly meetings already in place at the local health units. She worked with county health officials and public health nurses to identify the midwives practicing in each community and to coordinate the actual classes. She also wrote a very detailed handbook for midwives covering all aspects of the practice. 3/4 of the midwives in Arkansas lived and worked on plantations in the Delta, so letters were sent to the overseers to explain the course and ask for permission for them to participate. Classes were held in a centralized location in the county, usually a church or auditorium. The course length varied depending on the number of midwives and their capabilities, typically 8 to 12 classes, 1 to 2 days a week. The midwives in each county decided as a group what the fees would be for their services. And I wasn't able to identify these two groups. In the top photo, Mamie Hale is at the far left wearing her nursing uniform, and she's in the bottom photo, she's third from the right. The key objectives of the intensive course for midwives were strengthening the midwives program by providing consistent and comprehensive instruction to the majority of midwives across multiple counties, registration of all practicing midwives and location of unregistered ones, and improvement of birth supervision and registration, because statistics was a problem at that time. It was difficult for them to get accurate statistics on which to base their programs and know where to concentrate their efforts. As before, the content of the handbook and classes emphasized prenatal care, cleanliness, and alertness to abnormal physical symptoms in mothers or infants that warranted attention from the county public health nurse or local physician. Midwives had to pledge that they would not give any medications or teas, make internal examinations, or attend any births by first-time mothers or those who had had complications with previous births. What would set the intensive course apart from previous training by county health nurses was Hale herself. As one author has observed, she was an actress, a teacher, a song leader, and a preacher. She was strict with her students when it came to learning new techniques and information. But her skills, enthusiasm, and dedication to the work earned her much respect from midwives and colleagues who called her Nurse Hale at a time when Black women were not addressed as Miss. Frances Ruther, director of the health department's maternal and child division, recalled in an oral history interview that white colleagues working with Hale would refuse to eat in any restaurants that refused her service because she was Black. Hale's educational approach acknowledged the midwives' religious beliefs and dedication to their communities and used instructional techniques tailored to their educational level and capabilities. She strongly believed that the midwife's belief in a direct relationship with God in her work must be given consideration at all times. Excuse me. Classes opened with prayers and hymns selected by the midwives. A business meeting might be held in those counties like Ouachita and Union, where midwives had already established midwives clubs. The intensive course included classes on nutrition and diet, prenatal care, and care of the newborn. Midwives were encouraged to invite their patients to these classes, and sections of the midwife's handbook on these topics were printed separately as pamphlets for midwives to share with the mothers. This image shows expectant mothers in Crittenden County attending a special education session, most likely in the Felix High School in Marion, Arkansas. The young man in the photo was the only father brave enough to attend this session, so he was given a seat in the front row. Events in classes, which included the public and the training of the midwives themselves, was used as a way to educate the community about adequate maternal, prenatal, and newborn health care, and encouraged people to seek help from their local physician or health department if needed. Since the majority of midwives could not read or write, lessons involved demonstrations of techniques, use of visual aids, and the repetition of verbal information and hands-on activities. Several sources mentioned that the midwives particularly enjoyed role-playing exercises, which were referred to as social dramas. The first class of the course was used to get to know each other and go over the contents and care of the bag. This image shows midwives practicing how to pack their midwife bags. The detail in the lower left corner shows Hale standing in the center of the group wearing a black dress and apron. In this session, Hale would share her experiences as a public health nurse and the changes she had seen in her work and daily life. She used the example of adapting to changes in transportation from the horse and buggy to the airplane. Being a, quote, modern airplane midwife meant doing their best for their patients by keeping up with the latest methods and knowledge. This terminology became popular with the midwives, and they began using the term horse and buggy midwife to describe others they felt were using old-fashioned methods. The Historical Research Center is fortunate to have 3 midwife bags in its collection, one of which is complete. And these are part of our History of Public Health in Arkansas collection. An undated price list in our archives indicates the entire kit here would have cost $8.55. The most expensive items were the suitcase at $2, the hand towels at $1.50, and 3 yards of fabric for the apron, which was $1.50. The midwife was advised to have 2 sets of the cloth items on hand so they would always have a clean set for the next delivery. And along with the supplies, the midwife was expected to carry her permit, her pledge card, and the midwife's handbook. The bag also contained an envelope of prepaid postal cards for reporting new patients and births to the local health unit. The bag contents included liquid soap in a glass bottle and a scrub brush for cleaning hands thoroughly. Silver nitrate in wax capsules that were pinched to put drops in the baby's eyes, and this was to prevent infections that could cause blindness. Baby or fish scales to check the baby's weight. The enamel pan was used on the stovetop to boil water and sterilize the scissors used to cut the umbilical cord. The cord dressings and cotton balls were supposed to be sterilized before use. So Hale would tell the midwives to wrap those items in brown paper and place them in a low heat oven with a large potato. When the potato was done, the packages would be sterilized and ready for the next use. Later, Hale wrote a separate manual just for the midwife bag, which contained a list of contents, instructions for making a midwife cap and gown, and illustrations of how to arrange everything in the suitcase. One class was devoted to learning how to fill out the birth certificate using a 44 by 88-inch replica. Midwives were allowed to enlist family members or others to aid them in filling out the numerous forms and cards to be submitted to the Board of Health. In her 1946 journal article, Hale tactfully observed that filling out the birth certificate was, quote, a highly complicated process even for persons with more education. Selection of a baby name often delayed the completion of the birth certificate, so the Board of Health provided lists of baby names and their meanings for the midwife to share with the parents. A great deal of emphasis throughout the course was being able to recognize dangerous physical symptoms in either the mother or the newborn. If the newborn was underweight or appeared to have any health issues, the midwife was supposed to contact the public health nurse or the mother's physician for assistance. Babies needing hospital care were transported in a baby ambulance or carrier. The carrier shown was used by the Arkansas Health Department and is a part of the Historical Research Center collections. With its rigid metal sides and top, the baby ambulance offered significant protection to the infant being transported. The carrier features a sliding clear acrylic panel for easy observation and a screened vent on one end for ventilation. The interior has a thermometer mounted inside and a removable flannel hammock tied to a rigid wood frame. The frame is painted with lead-free enamel paint, which was easily cleaned. And a hot water bottle could be placed under the hammock inside the carrier if extra warmth was needed. As part of the campaign for premature infant care, the Board of Health provided at least one carrier, one non-electric incubator, and one electric incubator to each county health unit. Incubators were used in cases where the health care team felt that the premature infant would receive better care at home. Parents were given special instruction booklets on how to care for these babies. And I don't know how well you can see it here, but the electric incubator was warmed inside by a single light bulb, and there is a little partition there that separates that from the pillow there where the baby would be placed. We do not have one of these incubators in our collection yet, but I'm hopeful that we may acquire one in the future. The last class of the course was a detailed demonstration of the baby's delivery and aftercare for the newborn and mother. For the demonstration, Hale used two life-size, anatomically correct mannequins, Mrs. Chase and Baby Chase, so named after Martha Chase, the Rhode Island woman who designed them. Mrs. Chase weighed 30 pounds and was transported to class in the back seat of the car wearing a dress and a turban. Baby Chase had rubber tubing wrapped around his waist so that the midwives could practice cutting, tying, and dressing the umbilical cord, as she's demonstrating on the left there. The demonstration had the appearance of a stage set. Mrs. Chase covered with sheets and a regular sized bed surrounded by all the necessary supplies and a bench or table standing in for the stovetop. Dressed in the appropriate midwife attire, Hale would act out every step in the process, from washing her hands to cutting and dressing the umbilical cord. And as she went through these steps, she would keep up a running commentary explaining what she was doing in clear and simple language. So after the intensive course was completed, Hale or the local public health nurse would accompany each midwife on several home visits to observe the midwife in action, and if needed, demonstrate appropriate care for mother and child. Graduation ceremonies were all-day events to which the public was invited. These ceremonies honored the accomplishments and service of the midwives and also let the community know which midwives had received permits and which ones had not. There were speeches by local public health personnel and community leaders, Black and white, midwife testimonials as to what they had learned, condensed versions of midwife class content, and sometimes short educational films and demonstrations. This 1946 5-county graduation announcement from the Hope Star invites all readers, come one, come all, make this your educational and health day, and don't forget to invite your friends. The director of the Maternal and Child Health Division of the State Board of Health awarded the permits to the midwives who completed the course. And midwives who did not complete the course or decided to retire from practice were acknowledged for their community service and given framed certificates and flowers. Occasionally, retirement ceremonies would be held separately in a church or at a local health department, and the children the midwife had delivered and their parents would be invited. By 1950, Hale's new course materials were being used in 32 counties and 2 city health units in the state. The Board of Health reported that the number of practicing midwives had dropped from approximately 1,400 in 1945 to 960. Midwives with permits attended 75 births attended by a midwife. The number of deaths during childbirth for Black women decreased from 142 in 1941 to 43. In addition, the use of silver nitrate and prenatal blood tests had increased by 66%. The Board of Health felt the program had been successful enough to implement new enforceable rules in 1942, which required yearly permits. In addition to the existing regulations, which required good health and attendance at midwife classes, any new midwives seeking permits had to be 21 to 50 years old and be able to read and write. And apparently the ones who already had permits just had to attend the classes and they could get re-permitted. However, the reliance on midwives by poor Black women in Arkansas would not significantly decrease until better care and facilities became more accessible in the wake of the civil rights movement and increased federal health care funding. So in 1951, Hale was awarded a World Health Organization travel fellowship to study maternal and child programs in England, Sweden, Holland, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. She was one of 12 people that received an award and the only Black nurse. We don't know exactly when Mamie Hale left the state or have much information about her life afterwards. Primary sources indicate she continued working as a consultant to the State Board of Health as late as 1953. She married Stanley Garland of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and lived there until her death in July of 1979. While in Pittsburgh, she founded the home health care program at Allegheny General Hospital and served as the program's first director. She was also an active member of the Chi Eta Phi Nurses Sorority and founded an international chapter in Monrovia, Liberia in 1968. And after her death, her husband established the Mamie Garland Scholarship Program for nursing students in her honor. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation about Mamie Hale Garland. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those in the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions, I would just like to mention that in addition to my own research, I consulted papers and articles on midwifery in Arkansas that were written by Sarah Hudson and Peggy Bell. And in particular, Peggy Bell, who was a former faculty member of the UAMS College of Nursing, stated in an interview that she became interested in the topic after seeing the Historical Research Center's midwife bag on display in the UAMS library. All right, so let's see. Okay. All right. Did anyone have a question?
I'll remind everyone, if you have a question, use the chat feature on the in your Zoom.
All right, let's see. Carol Jenkins. Yeah, Ms. Jenkins, if you will email the hrc@uams.edu with your request, I'll be happy to do that for you. And Tim can direct it to me. Thank you, Andrea and Beth.
This presentation is being recorded, and so as soon as we get the recording back, we'll do a few edits to it, add a title slide for the series and things like that, and then it will be posted on the Historical Research Center website, and then also on YouTube and the Society for the History of Medicine and Health Professions, which is the support organization for the HRC. It'll be on their YouTube channel as well, but we'll send out the link for that when we get it.
Thank you, Logan. Yeah, that's the reason I wanted to do this presentation, is because the baby carrier is one of my favorite artifacts in the collection. I just think it's fascinating. All right, Ms. Jenkins, we would love if you could help us find an incubator.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, we will. I'll let Suzanne sign everyone off. And this series is a quarterly presentation, and so the next one will most likely be probably in May or June, somewhere around in there. And we don't know what the topic will be yet, but it'll be something based on an interesting artifact in our collection. So, and if you'd like to get on the mailing list or distribution list to receive announcements of upcoming presentations, you can email either Suzanne or myself, and we'll put you on the distribution list.
Thank you. Well, thank all of you for attending today's presentation, and that we hope that you'll be able to visit us in person soon. So stay safe and have a good afternoon.